I need to borrow private funds for a property deal, but I'm told that the law makes this difficult. How does this work? How would Mike go about to do this? I am as curious as Mike, so I'm going to sit here with my deep Mike voice and listen to your answer.
Nice. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. All right, cool. So I get this question a lot, especially in the investment space, because most people, when buying properties, there's always some kind of shortfall and somewhere or another. And if you look at funding models specifically from your normal retail banks, your apps, net banks, and the like, some don't give 100%. Even if they give 100%, there's a component of costs, transfer duty, things like that that need to be paid. So there's always cash shortfalls. Now, as a home, or let's say a owner occupier or a first-time home buyer or someone that's buying a home to live in, this normally isn't an issue because this is their dream. This is what they're they've been saving up for, and they've got money aside and they're willing to put money in. In fact, a lot of them would like as little a bond as possible, because in their minds it's a debt and they want to pay off the debt, right? So I'm speaking more in the investment space when we're looking at guys that are trying to leverage as much as possible and basically buy as many properties as possible with the least amount of cash. So that's the conversation that we're having. So around private funding, sometimes called angel investment. Some people also try categorize it within the JV space, but the reality is basically you don't have the cash, you bought the property, maybe you got a loan from a bank, now there's a shortfall, and you're looking elsewhere to try get this money in. And I mean, it's not a small thing. So we're not even also speaking about guys that are just looking for 50K, like bridging. I mean, I just did one now where, it was around the 3 million rand mark, where they were trying to cover a 10% shortfall. It was a massive project, including renovations and a small little eviction project. So it can get rather big. So the question always comes up on what happens when I'm trying to lend or borrow money, rather. Is this legal? Like, I hear it's so difficult to do. The reason for this is because it's a national, and I'll try and make it simple. National Credit Act it's very similar to the Consumer Protection Act in the sense that it's very consumer orientated. National Credit Act governs credit agreements. So this is any type of agreement, typically where you'd be borrowing money and then be an interest component where you'd pay this money back plus interest, right? So it's credit, it's your typical credit. National Credit Act governs how these agreements are supposed to actually function and what certain basic prerequisites and laws governing the fairness of these agreements. It's there to avoid people being over indebted. So and it's a big problem. So you do tend to find sometimes where debt is too accessible, people just keep buying on debt, but then eventually aren't actually able to make any of the repayments, and they start basically digging a hole. So the National Credit Act governs this and sets basic rules for this. Now, there was a stage where the National Credit Act accepted that certain transactions didn't need to be governed by the National Credit Act because they fell below a certain amount. So this is where your credit provider had to be registered as a credit provider. But the Act accepted that if it was a small loan agreement, for example, or if it wasn't within the course of your business. So like if I gave Cilna 1,000 Rand, for some reason she wouldn't need 1,000 Rand from me, but if I gave you 1,000 Rand,
I'll take it.
There wouldn't be an issue because it was like a money lent between two friends. What would the problem be? And then, shockingly, a few years ago, the threshold was reduced to zero, basically meaning that any money that changed hands that was arm's length. And I mean, this would still be arm's length. So even though there's a friendship, it's not as though I'm lending to my wife or a company of mine or something. So any money that's lent would be a problem. And there was a court case that actually came out where a gentleman out of he was being kind. He actually lent money to someone to help them in a venture that they had. And the interest rate was nominal, but when it came to try to collect the money, the consumer, the person that borrowed the money, actually refused to pay him back. saying that, and this they were slightly connected. So I think it was like a brother-in-law or something like that, and the court actually held there. Unfortunately, threshold is zero. It's zero. So there is no course of business. It's money being lent is money being lent. So bringing this all back down, National Credit Act does make it difficult for money to be lent. The person that struggles the most with this is the lender, because remember, the borrower is the one being protected. So if you as a borrower borrow money, at the end of the day, it's the lender that might be prejudiced if that agreement's not enforceable. You as a borrower can borrow, you can pay back. You're actually in the driving seat when it comes to that. So just bear that in mind. As a borrower, it's not actually difficult to get the money. It's difficult to find someone willing to give you the money because the law makes it harder for them to give you money. So what the two solutions for this is, if you're getting money from someone that's not normally a credit provider, they register as a credit provider. So that's not ideal, takes very long. It's a bit of a mission. There's certain prerequisites, criminal clearance certificates need to be submitted, et cetera, et cetera. So that's not often the ideal solution. What I do find, however, is loans between businesses are a lot easier. So if you are running an investment company, it does make it easier, because as a juristic person borrowing money, if you're considered to be relatively sophisticated, which is measured by your asset value or annual turnover, you might be able to avoid the NCA applying, thus making money more accessible to you, because people won't mind lending money if they're not worried about the legislation. So above a certain threshold, you're good, and a loan above a certain amount. So if it's considered to be a large loan being made to a juristic person, which sometimes with property deals is the case, you might also be able to avoid this. So that's the good news. As long as it's a business, effectively, it's a juristic person raising money, and that juristic person has an asset value or annual turnover of over R1 million, or the loan is above 250,000 Rand, the NCA wouldn't apply, meaning that your lenders might be happier to lend money to you. Yeah.
Bruno, I'm so grateful for that answer, because every single time, see, this is why I miss Chris, every single time I'm in Toys R Us with my 12-year-old son that I just referred to, and he says, Mama, can I please borrow money for Hot Wheels? I say, my boy, I would love to, like, I'd love to, but the NCA limits me. So I've been correct. Thank you, Bruno.
Nice one, nice one.